Buzz, HarperCollins Book Buzz. Check it out. Do-do-do, Book Buzz, HarperCollins Book Buzz. Brought to you by Library Love Fest.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It worked. Why is this?
Hello.
Welcome back to another episode of Galley Club. This is Virginia Stanley. I'm joined by my two colleagues.
Hi, Lainey Mays. Good to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Essie. It's nice to see you all. See you all.
See you all. Yeah, and we have this is our next installment in this really cool program that we started at our Galley Club. And so we have a new book that Lainey and Essie revealed last Tuesday. Super excited. So I am going to turn it over to Lainey to lead the charge.
Okay, well, before we talk a little bit about the measure, this is our March Galley Club pick. We're very excited and a lot of in-house buzz for this one. So we're excited to, honestly, for us three to have someone to talk about it with, because we all want to talk about it. But before we get into a little bit about what the book is about, I'd like to introduce our guest on this new episode. This is the episode once a month that we bring on people behind the book. So you get to know a little bit about the journey. And today we have Liz Stein, the editor of the book. Liz is executive editor at William Morrow, where she edits a range of upmarket fiction and select narrative nonfiction, including book club fiction, thought-provoking women's fiction, literary fiction, historical fiction, high concept thrillers, and memoir. Hi, Liz.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. And then we're very excited because we have the audiobook narrator, Julia Whelan. Julia, hi. Julia is a novelist, screenwriter, actor, Grammy-nominated audiobook director, and award-winning audiobook narrator of over 500 titles. Her performance of her own debut novel, the internationally best-selling My Oxford Year, loved that book, garnered a Society of Voice Artist Award. Her second novel, Thank You for Listening, is forthcoming from HarperCollins in August 22. That might come up later, so just stick around. Hi, Julia.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, okay, so I think we should give them a little bit of background on the measure, right? So this is our March Galley Club pick, The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich. We're going to talk about it all month. Next week, you can see Nikki herself on the episode, so please join us. You can ask all the questions. Nothing's off limits. We're going to talk about the book and the plot, so read before you come. And the book, just a quick wrap up. It's hard to put this book in a quick sentence because there's so much to talk about. But in this book, everybody around the world wakes up one day and they have a box on their front step, has a string, different sizes, it ranges, and they are slowly figuring out that tells you how much longer you have to live. So, of course, that kind of throws everything into a lot of chaos because everyone wants to know why they're there. What does it mean? Is that really true? Why would someone do this to us? And so you follow a group of people who interchangeably are going through this at the same time, and they all have different lengths of string, and it's really beautiful. And I'm going to stop talking about it because I want Liz to talk a little bit more about the book and how she came to find it.
Great. Well, I'm very excited to do that. I feel like editors get to be very involved in shaping a book, but then we have very few opportunities to talk about the books in a public setting and share our love and enthusiasm. So this is a real honor to be with everybody here today. I love libraries, I love librarians, and it's so good to connect with you all. And I really appreciate you reading this fantastic book and joining for the conversation and just hearing us all jump for joy over this magnificent story that Nikki's written for us. And I'm excited for you to meet her next week. She's really remarkable, and I think you'll really enjoy seeing her. So, as Lainey said, I'm an editor of upmarket fiction. Most of my titles fit in that big book club space. It's kind of like sweet spot commercial literary fiction. And when I'm reading submissions and looking for the books that stand out to me, one big part of that is this a book that's going to ignite discussion? And I think without a doubt, regardless of who you ask or regardless of how they feel about the story or characters in it, I think everybody can agree that it's the type of book that's going to get us talking and ignite those discussions. Editors receive so many submissions daily, weekly, and yearly. I mean, it's in the hundreds of the number of proposals we get per year. And, we don't publish hundreds of books individually per year. So it's really a special thing when you acquire a book, especially from a debut author who's unknown, and you really just, you believe in the material, you believe in the voice and the story and the messages and themes. And so that for me was very, very obvious from my first read. When the book came to me on submission, I remember this was last year. It was in January of last year. It was actually Inauguration Day. It was January 20th, a day that was very memorable for many reasons, including receiving this submission, which stood out to me because of the title. I thought it was, a really catchy title. And then, the top of the email from the agent said, "Would you choose to find out how long you will live or the day you will die?" And I was like, my goodness, well, this is a premise that I haven't really encountered. And I remember reading the first chapter and kind of wanting to just like skim and speed read through the whole book, because I knew I was going to love it just by meeting the early characters and their voices and just getting a great sense of the concept. So I had to practice a lot of restraint in slowing down and, enjoying the moment of being a fresh reader to the story and not trying to like skip ahead to the end to make sure it all comes together. Because I think, when you're reading first drafts of books, sometimes, things go off the rails or it ends up in a way that you don't expect, and you're not really, aligned in the vision that the author has for the story. So I was just like, I really hope this works out because I'm loving it. And I really want to be able to publish this book. And, as you've hopefully seen in your early reads of the book and all the chatter about this, it 100% delivers. It all comes together. And I appreciate Nikki's diligence and, polish and the work she did with her agent before sending it to me, because she made my life a lot easier during the editing. Not to say we didn't do work on it, but it was a real joy to edit. She's a remarkable writer. It's very accessible, but beautiful line by line. Her ability to get to the point of what she wants to say without being too flowery, but offering just enough like analogy or poetic sense to get those messages across. I think really are connect in that sweet spot of what we like to find with that commercial literary crossover fiction. So I had a great deal of fun editing the book and asking all the big life questions that are presented in this story. Tremendous themes of fate. Are we all predestined to arrive at where we will arrive? Why do we treat each other different based on something we have no control over? How does a society divide when something new, some like other sense is introduced? Can we measure our lives in the sense of fulfillment, even if it's not a long life? What makes a life satisfying? There's just so much love and empathy in the pages, and at a time such as these, and continue to be such as these, there's no better moment for a story like this to get us to pause, come together, and talk about these things. The book is not about the pandemic. It's not about war or impending war. It's about life and humanity and connection and all the things that I feel like we forget or we don't have time to think about when we're all caught up in the trauma of what life can bring and what we are sometimes surrounded with and have no control over. I know Nikki she set out to write the book before the 2020 pandemic began. So she had the idea, but the lion's share was written during 2020. And, as the pandemic was unfolding around her, and, I know she's going to talk about this next week, so I'm not going to steal her thunder, but I know it was, a bit of a cathartic experience for her to write about this, as it was for me to read, to feel like I can look at these characters who are loosely intertwined throughout and dealing with some unexpected moment, unexpected life-changing thing in the kind of creates that before times and after times, and how are they able to process and come together and find joy and find each other. And for me, in reading and editing and now talking about the book, I think I've found that that's what's most memorable and critical to this discussion. And I think for book clubs, people who are coming to libraries to find their next, great thought-provoking read, I think this is going to do that job for us. And I'm so grateful to Nikki for writing the book, and grateful for all the readers who are going to be talking about it.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny because you did so wonderful of like all of the topics that it encompasses, just like, some light topics to talk about. But I just felt reading that you could take one word and it could be so topical, but it's not about that. But maybe that's me seeing what I want and reading a book. But I just thought it was such a deft and like on key way to write this book, that it's not about the pandemic, like you were saying, but it does feel very resonant of that time. And I'm so impressed with that.
Yeah, I think on an emotional level and certainly thematic, it really ties in so well to, what we've all been going through, and doing it in such a removed way. You're not reading about COVID or, illness and people, in hospital and dying, but you are reading about stories of characters who are dealing with some really big life-altering moments. And I think it's a great way to synthesize some of that stuff without being on the nose, and in a joyous way. It's a celebration of humanity. It's a celebration of connection and saying we are all in it together. And I think that message comes across really well. And I've just always been in awe of her way of doing that for us in a sense that I hadn't seen it in fiction, especially at that time. We were a year into the pandemic, and I know authors had writer's block, editors had reader's block. Like, it was all feeling like it was falling apart, and I needed something in the new year. It was a time of change, and I needed something that was going to get me to sit up and say, this is a book that's going to do that magic. My team, the publishing team, was unanimous, which is always a great feeling and doesn't always happen. You get some naysayers saying, oh, I don't really see it, or, it's to this, to that. But this was a book that we were really fast about because the concept was so strong, and Nikki's writing was at such a level in just, the first few pages as you're reading, that you really feel like you're in good hands. She's really confident. And I think that's really meaningful to the publishing office when you're taking a chance on a new writer. And, we all saw like the comp bookshelf, what other books is this like? And, what kind of audience are we going to bring in? And, a lot of my team were talking about like Station 11 and The Age of Miracles and The Immortalist. And there were all these other kind of like-minded titles that kind of tackle big life issues in a, wrapped up in a great plot and with terrific characters. And so it just seemed obvious in a way that I was very thankful for, because it made everything move so quickly. And we had to be quick. It was, a very buzzy title, a lot of interest. We preempted the novel in a matter of, it feels like hours. I know it was maybe a couple of days, but there was a lot happening The book was also quickly, the TV film rights were optioned really quickly, and that's in development. And I'm just so happy that we've got such a great supportive team at HarperCollins who believe in this book and are really excited to get it out there to readers.
It's so exciting. And I think that we have lots of questions, so we'll get to them when we want to talk to Julia about the audiobook part of it, which is a whole nother aspect of the appeal of this book. But what I think is so cool is that if even if you're not a reader of this type of book, I mean, you've got to suspend. I mean, everybody gets a box in front of their door around the world. How does that happen? Oh my, did you open it?
Should I?
No.
Would you?
I don't know. But
Isn't this great? Nikki sent this to me. She had a little holiday present for me inside the box, and it actually has the inscription that appears. If you probably can't tell on screen, but it has the measure of your life lies within, which is what happened in the book. And when I got it in the mail, I broke out into a cold sweat. I said, "Oh no, it's happening." No, and then I think that idea of would you know? Would you want to know? Would you want your family members, friends to know, and all of it? That's just such a clever way of introducing that conversation, and the boxes and the strings. It's fun. It should be fun for us on the marketing side to do little things with it, but it's really just the the notion of what they represent, right?
Well, I mean, when it comes down to it, obviously we all have a time. There's going to be a time for all. It's going to happen. This is just telling you that perhaps this is when it's going to happen. And so it's really, it's just distilled to that, but it is so much more than that. And it's just so, the characters in the book and the conversations and the predicaments and the decisions, that's why we've chosen this book, because there's so much to talk about. But as I said, we have many questions. Lainey, what do you want to do? Should we jump right into the audiobook and then open it up to questions? Because this is the opportunity for librarians to learn from you all. So Lainey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's talk about audio and then maybe answer some questions. And I think we were talking a little before of like, where did the audiobook come from? And so Liz, if you want to give a little intro into how it got into Julia's hands, then Julia can talk about the audio.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I'm just a really big fan of Julia's. I'm a big audio listener, and I tend to like to listen to her books. So when the editor and author are presented with the fact that yes, your book is going to be recorded as an audiobook, we get the opportunity to make suggestions and not make nominations, and then listen to auditions from various narrators. So I was thrilled when Julia was available and accepted and was interested in the project, because she's perfect for it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was just reflecting on that. I got an email about the book, as I often do, but there was a special thing here in the offer email saying this book has a lot of buzz, which is not usually how I make decisions, and it's not how I made the decision based on this one. I just thought it was a really compelling concept, and I also like to support debut novelists whenever possible. And I was wrapped up in the premise, and I, from my perspective, when I read a book, I'm always using the part of my brain that's trying to break it down for performance. That's how I read a book. And when I'm reading for pleasure, which doesn't happen all that often, but when I am, I have to turn that part off and realize I don't have to know how to pronounce this word. I don't have to figure out how to do that accent. I can just read this book for fun. But when I was prepping this one, what I found is that I was actually getting distracted. I would forget that I needed to be prepping it, and I would just get caught up in the story and the predicaments and the different thought experiments that present themselves. And one thing that I think is so, she did such a good job with, because it's so intact. You don't sit there as a reader thinking, oh, wow, that's a gaping hole, or they didn't cover that. Everything is accounted for. And as your brain, especially I think, as we've talked about in the last 2 years, we look at an event that probably should have been unifying, as close to an alien invasion sort of event as we could have, only to find that it actually wasn't that unifying. And my brain is now trained to see, how is this going to be subverted in some way? How is this going to be made difficult by certain people? How is this going to be politicized? And that same attention to detail is in the book. And I so appreciated that as soon as I would start thinking, well, how is this going to impact something like people getting jobs or people getting a mortgage? And Nikki would be like, this is exactly how. And I really appreciated how complete it was. And now that I'm hearing from Liz, how quickly it was actually written and edited, that is even more of an accomplishment. If this wasn't something that was being sat on for, 10 years with every possible, distance and the benefit of that, but to really just come in and say, this is the story as it needs to be told. And she has such a capable narrative voice that does not feel like a usual debut also, which I think is just really special, and gave me a lot to anchor onto as I was reading and narrating.
It's funny to hear you say that note about the details and, how Nikki would, account for, all the variables that might happen when your world is completely altered. And I do remember a lot of discussions with her about, troubleshooting, like, well, we can't do that because then, if we can't do X, Y would happen. And, even up into, I think, the proofing stage, we did several rounds of edits, then it went through copy editing, and then it went through 2 rounds of proofing. I think even in that late stage, somebody flagged something and said, we have to address this because, when you're doing that kind of like speculative fiction where the world is like slightly altered, you have to be really careful. Because readers, rightfully so, will get upset and say, we need you to put everything together perfectly. So we did our best, and I'm hoping.
I know. I mean, I personally, having read it through, as like I said, my prep read, prepared questions about it, and then performing it, I felt very confident in the airtight nature of the story. So that's all I can offer. But
Well, Julia,
I have a question for you. The book has many narrators, different point of views. And there was a conversation about, do we need as many performers as narrators? And, I remember talking to the producer who felt strongly that we should stick with one. And how is that challenging for you? How do you go about that? And, I'm just curious about that process.
Sure. I think I can absolutely see that being open for debate. I think the fact that it is a third person narrative voice, though, helps that decision making, and that at that point, I see myself less as trying to represent each character and more as representing the authorial voice of the piece. So in that situation where there is such a strong narrative voice, that's my job. So for instance, I created characters and they're differentiated, but I didn't do a full vocal characterization performance as I would do for maybe other books, because I felt that it was more about, we need to be able to see ourselves in all of the characters that are represented on the page. And therefore I wanted to kind of take a more neutral stance with the performance, where the concept and the premise is anchoring your path through the book, and therefore the characters are being used to exemplify or challenge that through line of the narrative. And so for me, it was less about the creation of characters and more about the creation of the archetypes that reflect what is happening in the narrative, if that makes any sense. Sorry, that just felt like I went back to like English major workshop level stuff, but that's how I feel about it.
So fascinating. I've been dying to ask you that question.
Yeah, I have a question before we're gonna go to all of these, but just quickly, Julia, what is like a usual timeline for recording? Like how long does it take? It doesn't have to necessarily be for this book, but like what's a usual timeline for recording?
Well, when did we say we were doing this? Back in November. And my goal was that I would record in, I believe, January. This was about 10 hours, I think, 10 finished hours, which for me is I do about 2 hours in the booth for every finished hour of audio. So it's about a 20-hour recording process. And I tend to do 2 finished hours a day. This is aforementioned English major. This is where my math skills break down embarrassingly. If I'm doing 2 finished hours in the booth a day and it's a 10-hour book, let's just do that. It takes me about a week. I think I did this in about 5 days. That doesn't include the prep time of reading the book ahead of time and coming up with the character lists of characters and words, and then getting that feedback from Nikki and all of that. But yeah.
Do you eat a lot of green apples?
Yes, I do.
Do you want to
I
explain
do.
that? I've heard this
Yeah,
recently.
there is nothing to explain other than we don't know how it works, but it works. It is, green apples are the antidote to mouth noise for some reason. It's like the acidity in them or something like dries up all of the nasty bits. Also, apples generally, like the pulp of an apple has always been really good for sore throats, for raw throats. But something specifically about the Granny Smith, like green apples and mouth noise.
I've
We
never
don't know.
heard that before. That is
Yeah, we don't
fascinating.
know.
That's so cool. You see, you learn something
Yeah.
new every day.
There you go. There you go. If you're ever doing a podcast or something and you're like, get a little cotton mouth or a little poppy or whatever, green apple.
Get the Granny Smith.
Yep.
I love that.
Then disunite and celebrate.
So next week when we have the author on, we can say, and now here's a trivia question for anybody who was listening closely the last Tuesday's interview with Julia Whelan and Liz Stein.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
You should work that into the program to kind of
Totally.
test people's.
Yes. Are you paying attention?
Right. Who was taking notes?
Right. You know what? This is the kind of thing that I think, I mean, I'm finding, so interesting. I know Lainey and Essie are too. We're just writing to each other saying there's so many questions, because it's just fascinating. And, editorially, audio, it's all, every book is obviously different and every approach is different. And so this is wonderful. We have lots of questions and comments. So I think what we'll do is, Essie, can you just play the first couple of, 28 seconds of the clip, just so people get a sense of it, and then we'll go to the questions. But this is a bit from the audiobook of The Measure by Nikki Ehrlich.
When the box inscribed with Nina's name appeared outside her door, Nina was still asleep in bed, her eyelids twitching slightly as her dormant mind wrestled with a difficult dream. She was back in high school, the teacher demanding to see an essay that Nina had never been assigned. It was a familiar nightmare for someone prone to stress, but it was nothing compared to the one awaiting her in the waking world.
Dun, dun, dun. Julia Whelan. Pretty neat. So that's the little bit. And so you can click on and into the chat room, and you'll hear a little bit more. And the early listeners galley, I believe, is available. And so download it to read it or to listen to it. And let's get to the question, shall we? Essie, you want to take the first one?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to say you were also, Jenna Marie said that you're making her commute much better listening to this audiobook. So thank you, Julia. Let me see, what's the first question on this very long list of questions? Okay. From Sylvia, Liz, do you remember the very first submission that stopped you in your tracks, and does that feeling ever get old?
Whoa. So I have probably read several thousand submissions in my career. And so I actually cannot remember the very first one that stopped me in my track, but 100% the feeling never gets old. It's what I am in this position for because of that moment when the discovery of finding something magnificent, the voice, the concept, the stories, the character, and that spark is what brings me to my desk every day, because it's just it's an adrenaline rush that you cannot match.
Well, someone said that you should sell string bookmarks of different sizes, which I thought was kind of a fun idea. We need to crowdsource this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. We talked a little bit about this. So Liz, if you have anything to add. Nicole said, I just finished the book this morning. It was one of those books that will stay with you and it makes you think, and the pacing was incredible. By dividing the book into seasons and then into a few years later, is that the way the book arrived, or was it worked on? Like, I guess they're asking, did it start off all as one story and then get divided, or was it already like that?
No, we had the divisions, we had the different parts. They had to get moved around a bit, and I can't remember exactly, but we had to make some changes to how it was divided and what season we ended up landing on. I remember the original manuscript, I don't think we landed on spring, and we felt like that would be a good note to, the kind of rebirth and, good feelings associated with spring. So that was something that we did change during editing.
That's what we were talking about before, is how long ago well, not terribly long ago, but we were saying 2 weeks ago is 9 years ago. So you really have to go back. We're all going back in our email. What did I say? What did I promise? Okay, let's see. I got so much love here. Kimberly McGee says, I love how different the experience is reading and listening to a new story. And Jenna Marie, back with a question, says, this question is for everyone on the call. Would you open your box and do the calculations about your string?
Well, I know my answer because I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I've decided I will not open, and I want to just continue living my life as without that knowledge.
I think I would have opened mine because too much of my time would be consumed thinking about it if I didn't know. I think I'd want to know.
Julia?
Yeah, this prompted a lot of discussion. Every day I'd walk out of the booth, this was like dinner table conversation about this book. And I think what I came to, which is kind of a cop-out, but I absolutely would not open it. Absolutely not. Unless I was presented with something. Like if I were ill, I think I would then open it to know if I was going to dodge this, or if this was really it. And then if so, how much time? That's my have her cake and eat it too answer.
I like that though. I think that's a
Yeah.
good answer.
Thanks.
It makes sense. I don't think I would. Well, I would not want to, but in the book, as we'll talk about next week with Nikki, some people have to open their box. So I'm even if I was made to, it would be hard to do it, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was actually one of the
Versus
most interesting parts of Absolutely. And the people who also opened it before they knew what it meant. And I think about being in that position a lot, and that I mean, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'd like to say no, I wouldn't, but I know me. Ugh. So cool, so discussable, so amazing. Okay, Essie, what other questions do we have in the chat room?
After that one, let me see. It's honestly, a lot of it is everyone talking about the same question that we just answered. Everyone's having a good time putting their input in and their opinion on it. Let me see.
Well, we have one from Kim McGee, who was curious how Nikki came up with the idea, even with COVID going on. I guess ask for that next week, or
I guess we can ask her.
There's
Yeah, I'll
one-
give a teaser to it, so that you can come in next week to find out the full answer. But I know that Nikki was very fascinated with the Greek myths of the fates. And that was a good source of inspiration for her. And she'll talk more about that. So come back.
Oh,
That's
that makes
fun.
sense.
There is,
Ooh.
I'm sorry if I skipped one, but there is one by Nikki or Vicky Nesting, sorry. Julia, do you have one audiobook at a time, or do you have multiple projects going on at once?
Typically speaking, I'm recording one book at a time. Sometimes that doesn't work if I've scheduled like a director session where I've got to stop in between and go to another one, but I am always doing prep for another book while I'm recording one, and then also doing corrections for one that's been done before. So usually there's about 3 books happening simultaneously, but I'm only recording one at a time.
Do you ever suddenly give somebody a Cockney accent by mistake? Oh my God.
Sometimes, no, I mean, sometimes it is difficult to, this is why I try to take a day between books, if at all possible, just to like shake the voice out of my head and get into the new one, especially if I'm swinging from like, I don't know, the Four Winds to, you know, Beach Read or something.
Have you ever had an experience, Julia, where you've had, I guess, editorials say that's not the way that character sounded in the author's head? Like, has that ever happened?
Not
Where
to
it's
my
like,
face.
That's not your face.
I mean, I think I really am communicative, so I try to run everything. If I'm going to take a big swing, I clear that with people before I do it. But if anything, I've had incredible authors just being incredibly generous of like, that's amazing. That's exactly what I had in my head. And I'm like, well, you wrote it. Like, it's you. I'm just doing what the directions you put on the page. And so I don't think I've had, like I said, that they've admitted to me or come back to me with, I don't think, no.
Nobody has said that's not the direction. I mean, I think that it is amazing. It's a wonderful gift. I mean, you are so talented to be able to sort of, just sort of get into the skin, to get into that, and to envelop the character and to just know it.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you. It's fun.
See, is there time for me to ask Julia a question?
Sure, yeah.
I'm curious about how you've written 2 novels and you've recorded hundreds. How has the experience of writing a novel impacted your, experience as a narrator, and vice versa? Did writing your book, was that process impacted by all the time that you spend professionally narrating them?
That's yeah, there's seemingly contradictory answers to that. The first one is that I was a writer. I went to school. I have a creative writing degree. I was always writing before I started this job. So I always approached each book as like, this is someone's precious baby and I am fostering it. And I never took that for granted. Like, to me, I understood what an author was going through from the beginning. So having written now myself didn't really change that feeling for me. It's not like I learned what it meant to be a writer. But on the other side of it, I came out of a very, literary tradition. And the thing that this job gave me was realizing that there is good writing across category and genre. And I was exposed to so many different types of writers that I would not have self-selected if I were just going into a bookstore pulling things. And so this job gave me that just very large, wide lens view of what people are doing, the movement of the industry, finding my own voice in that. And so in that respect, I think the 2 books that are published that I've written are infinitely better than the ones I wrote before, because I've read so widely now. And that's what this job gave me. I don't know if that answered it, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We do have a question about your home studio. They want to know about your setup, if you could tell them a bit about it.
Sure. So I am in a 4x4 little booth. And then I've got my monitor here, and I record from home, and I record on Pro Tools, and it is generally quiet unless there is a leaf blower or a garbage truck outside. And that is the audiobook narrator's constant state of being, waiting for garbage trucks to pass.
So
So
glamorous.
it's so glamorous. So it's hot in the summer and cold in the winter, and yeah, sometimes I'm recording in a bathing suit and sometimes I'm recording in a down jacket, and we get it done.
So we have a bunch more questions, and and we also want to get to the quick book buzz. Just a handful of titles that we want to talk about. Liz is going to talk about, and we're going to talk about Julia's book, forthcoming book. So if we can go through the next couple of questions, guys. If we've already asked some of these, then that's fine. And if we haven't, perhaps we'll ask them real quick and then move on to the buzz. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we have two
Sounds good
people
for me.
asking about the cover, about the direction. It says, can you tell us anything about how the cover art was developed and chosen?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So here's my copy so you can see it. Yeah, so, coming up with a cover is never the same, for the books you work on. And sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's more challenging, but it's always interesting. And, I always love to get my authors' hopes and dreams and ideas and, how they envision it, and kind of play that against, the market and what my publishing team is looking for. And then, I put a little bit of my opinions in there too. So it's a lot of, perspectives. And so when we were talking about this book, we were hoping to achieve an iconic look, some objet on the cover that would be memorable, would stand out, and would be tie into the book thematically and not be too on the nose, but give just enough of the story and concept. So what we loved about this was kind of the dead leaves against the leaves that are not yet dead and alive and vibrant and colorful, and kind of putting those two together to symbolize, life and death and how we're all joined together. And then, of course, we see the string tying it all together, as our nod to the story. And, this was a concept that I saw in the first round. It was not these colors. I think that was the leaves and the colors of the leaves and which leaves had colors and which were gray and what the background color was and the effects and texture in the background and the font and the treatment on the author's name. That all took a while to get to. We went through many different iterations, moving leaves, making the string longer, having the string go to the other side. It was a lot of detail. So we wanted to be really deliberate in what we did. And I'm so pleased with how things netted out. And I hope everybody else loves it and sees it as the memorable cover art that we see.
Yeah, and there was a deliberate action not to put the box on the cover. That someone else asked about that. Like, you didn't want to put the box on the cover?
It was an idea that we discussed and did explore, but ultimately the feeling was it was too on the nose, and that we wanted something that was just more metaphoric.
Okay, a question from Jenna. Liz, characters' identities play a strong role from queer women in an interracial relationship to Christian politicians. Did the identities of any characters change during the editing process?
These characters were fully formed when they came to me. We fleshed them out, created more backstory and developed them, but they came with their identities. They were, full-bodied characters in Nikki's mind, and she did such a great job putting them on the page. And she'll probably talk about this next week, but I know it was important to her that her cast of characters was as reflective as it could be of our society and kind of showing the different point of views that would be entertained in a situation like this.
Okay. I think we have time for one last question, and this is from Janet Lockhart, who says, I've always been curious about the scheduling of recording an audiobook. Does the book need to be absolutely final before beginning?
Unmuting, sorry. I've done it. Yes, typically I hold off until there is an official recordable, but I've recorded from like a third pass before or something where, we just need to get it going and then we can do any remaining fixes and pickups. But I don't think I've ever done something that's like it's pre-copy edit or anything like that. No.
Okay.
Because I think, and the goal is always a day and date audiobook, right? I mean, typically, so we're always trying to juggle my schedule with publishers and, things are delayed and that just happens and we roll with it.
Okay. I think, the questions about, I love the questions about the characters in the book because that was something I wanted us to talk about, and that's wonderful. And the process, I think everybody's so really curious about how does that all work? And it's just, we could be here for forever. And we don't have to stop at hard 3 o'clock, but we know that folks have to get back to their desks and the front desk if they're working at the library. But we do want to talk about some books. So Julia, we have a book coming from you, and we are super excited about that. And can you talk a little bit about your forthcoming book?
Oh, thank you. I can, but I have not developed like a good elevator pitch yet. So I tend to sprawl. So I'm going to try to not do that. Oh, there it is. Isn't that pretty?
Yeah, it's awesome.
It is set in the audiobook world. It is a rom-com, but being me, it's really more of like a rom dramedy. That said, it's not as weepy as my Oxford year. It is about an actress who has been narrating audiobooks due to a tragic situation in her life that has prevented her from doing on camera. So she is narrating audiobooks. She, however, even though she got her start narrating romance under a pseudonym, she doesn't do it anymore because frankly, she doesn't buy what romance is selling. And she gets one last opportunity to do one last romance for a lot of money that would allow her to take care of her ailing grandmother. And in the process of that and being cynical about all things romance, she forges a connection with her co-narrator, who is, his name is Brock McKnight, because that's the most pseudonymy name I could come up with. And through the cover of anonymity and not knowing who the other person is, they forge a connection. And it's about what happens when you can put aside your past and step out from behind the mic and take a risk and hopefully find acceptance.
Sounds wonderful. Yep.
Yeah.
And there's a green apple reference. So
awesome.
Full service.
I loved my Oxford year so much, but I did have to ask Elle. I was like, is this one as sad? Because it was all in my feels. But I loved it so much. So I'm so excited.
Yeah. Well, good. Yes.
Oh. And it comes out in August. So
August 2nd. Yes.
Nobody knows. Great.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And Liz, you're going to talk about a couple of books that are coming out.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about some books that we're really excited about from William Morrow. This first one is called Last Summer on State Street. It's a debut by Toya Wolf. It's for fans of Jacqueline Woodson and Brett Bennett. And it's a striking coming-of-age debut about friendship, community, and resilience set in the housing projects of Chicago during one life-changing summer. The novel takes place in 1999 and revolves around a young Black teenage girl whose world is turned upside down when the public housing complex where she lives begins getting demolished to allow for regentrification in the area. The novel is inspired by the author's experience growing up in this world, and she definitely pulls back the curtain on what it's like to come of age in a place where gang violence, stray bullets, and predators are part of one's social fabric. It's a powerful story that is filled with harsh realities, but balances with joy and buoyancy. And this is coming out in June. Next up, we have a novel called Mika in Real Life. And it's from Amiko Jean, the author of the New York Times bestselling young adult novel, Tokyo Ever After. And it's a whip smart, laugh out loud, funny, and utterly heartwarming novel about motherhood, daughterhood, and love, how we find it, how we keep it, and how it always returns. It's about a woman who is reunited with the daughter she placed in adoption 16 years ago. And it's perfect for fans of Kylie Reid's Such a Fun Age. Gail Honeyman's Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, and Rebecca Searles in 5 Years. It's a heart-wrenching and uplifting novel that explores the weight of silence, the secrets we keep, and what it means to be a mother. So we're also excited about On Rotation by Charlene Obuobe. This dazzling debut novel is perfect for fans of the watchers of Grey's Anatomy and the book 7 Days in June. It explores that time in your life when you must decide what you want, how to get it, who you are, all while navigating love, friendship, and the realization that the path you're traveling is going to be a bumpy ride. It's about a young woman who has seemingly done everything right as the perfect immigrant daughter. So when everything falls apart, flunking an important med school exam, getting dumped by her boyfriend, and her best friend pulling away, she finds herself in the midst of a quarter-life crisis of epic proportions. And what unfolds is a story of love, family, friendship, and personal growth. And last up, another novel in June is called The Change by Kirsten Miller. It's Big Little Lies meets The Witches of Eastwick, a gloriously entertaining and knife-sharp feminist revenge fantasy about 3 women whose midlife crisis brings unexpected new powers, putting them on a collision course with the evil that lurks in their wealthy beach town. It's set in a Long Island oceanfront community and follows 3 different women who discover that midlife changes bring a whole new type of empowerment. And when the women find a teenage girl whose body was abandoned beside a remote beach, they decide to investigate, leading them to more bodies and to the town's most exclusive and isolated enclave, a world of enormous wealth where the rules don't apply. With newfound powers, the trio takes matters into their own hands.
That's a great,
Lot to be excited about.
yeah, no kidding. Oh, so many comments here about these books on Rotation, which Lainey is a major fan of On Rotation. And we did have a question about last summer. They want to know, well, all of the books are adult, but they wanted to know if it was YA appropriate.
So I'll speak to that. It's actually one of my novels I'm very excited about. I edited. So the book features girls. Primarily the book is revolving around girls who are about 12 and 13. So there is that side of it that is YA, but the subject matter is quite intense. And I'm actually really curious to know what other people think. When I read it, I thought it was squarely adult, but that's not the first time this question has been asked. So I do think there might be some overlap. And the author was a youth pastor, and she envisioned, the people that she used to work with being interested in reading the book. So I think there is some of that there.
Yeah, so many times the question comes up, and it's like, well, it's sort of subjective in a way, and everybody has to decide for themselves. But then there are sometimes answers that are like, absolutely not. So I think that your answer lends itself to read it and decide.
Yeah, and I also think it depends on the young adult who's reading.
Correct.
It is very case by case, but there is a field.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I just want to shout out The Change. We had the author on our podcast talking to her editor, Rachel Kahn, and it was a fabulous talk about just like feminism and writing and women coming to an empowerment. It was a fabulous conversation. So I will put the link in the chat if you want to hear more about The Change.
That is a really good point, Lainey, because that was a really, really cool conversation that just went off in all these different directions and subject matters. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, and definitely if you can put it in there, that would be great. It's terrific. Our whole podcast series is really great. I think we've gotten to all of our questions. So many people have said that they're very excited about these books. Many of them have heard of them, or them now have just been marked to be read, which is what we want to hear. And so there it is. It's 2:57. We had this wonderful conversation with both of you, giving us the inside scoop on editing and acquiring and the buzz that's taken place at Harper about this book. And Julia, your wonderful, inside look on recording an audiobook, what goes into that. God in heaven. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of hours. But just listening to that one little piece, people are like jazzed. So there it is. And I think, Essie, do we have all the links to everything so that folks can go to Edelweiss or NetGalley and download it, ebook, or listen to it? And this has been wonderful. This is a really big book at Harper. We have so many people who are just really, really excited about this, as are we. It's just a hugely discussable book, and there's so much to it. It's complex, and it's just a great read. I'm so excited that we have it under our roof. Liz, thanks for buying it.
Yes.
Well,
Julia, thanks for recording it.
Absolutely.
thanks for having me here.
Thank you both. And thank you for that wonderful presentation of titles, Liz. That's just perfect. So next Tuesday, we're going to have the author on, and maybe, Essie, can we show the jacket one more time? Oh, there you go. That's fine. There's the author, Nikki Ehrlich. She'll be on to talk about the measure. So everybody read it or listen to it by next Tuesday, or just be prepared. That's going to be spoiler alerts, because it's our book club, except it's in galleys. So it's a galley club. I think that's it. Lainey, Essie, what have I missed?
I think that was it. Yeah, we'll say goodbye to our Facebook friends, and thank you, Julia, and thank you, Liz. Really fabulous. I learned so much. It was fabulous.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to librarians about this book, The Measure. We really appreciate it. So
Absolutely.
yeah. All right. Well, folks, we'll see you next time, next Tuesday. And until then, be well. Take care.